It was supposed to be just another quiet morning until one arrogant cop made the wrong decision and crossed paths with the wrong black woman. He thought he could intimidate her, control her, silence her. But what he didn't know is that she wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was the one person who could bring his whole world crashing down. This isn't just a story about one bad cop. It's about pride, power, and what happens when the truth refuses to stay buried. So sit tight, because the moment you think you've figured it out is exactly when it all changes. Let us know what time you're listening and where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Now hit that like button, subscribe, and let's get into it. It was a quiet Sunday morning in Charleston, South Carolina. The kind of morning where the breeze carries the smell of fresh bread from corner bakeries and the sunlight filters through Spanish moss hanging lazily from old oak trees. Everything moves slower here on Sundays. Streets were half empty, people greeted each other with soft nods, and for a moment the world felt almost still. Down by the local farmers' market, a vibrant but peaceful hub, lined with folding tables and wooden crates filled with squash, strawberries, and jars of homemade jam, a woman moved with graceful familiarity. Her name was Dr. Regina Blake. She was tall, poised, and moved like someone who knew how to command a room without ever raising her voice. In her late 50s, dressed in a simple gray hoodie and black workout pants, she blended in with the morning crowd. Nothing flashy, no entourage, just a local woman buying tulips and sourdough like anyone else. But for Regina, this outing was more than a grocery run. It was one of the rare times she allowed herself to be just human. Not the title, not the pressure, not the expectation. Just Regina, daughter, mother, widow, citizen. She had her coffee in one hand, a small bouquet in the other, and her keys dangling from her wrist. Her guard was down. Her mind was on dinner plans with her son. And that's exactly when it happened. It started with a voice, sharp, unwelcome, cutting through the morning calm like a slap to the face. "Hey, what do you think you're doing here?" She turned, startled, almost spilling her coffee. Standing just a few feet away was a white police officer, tall, broad, with a look in his eye that wasn't curious, it was confrontational. His stance, the way his hand hovered too close to the baton on his belt, it told her this wasn't going to be a misunderstanding cleared up with a smile. Regina blinked, unsure if he was even talking to her, but then he took a step forward and her stomach sank. His eyes were locked on her. "I said," he barked, "what are you doing here? You belong in this neighborhood?" Her breath caught. She wasn't in uniform. She didn't have her badge clipped to her side. He didn't know who she was, and that was the point. This wasn't about crime. This wasn't about suspicion. This was about assumptions. This was about power. "I'm picking up groceries," she answered, calm but firm. But calm, it seemed, only made him angrier. His voice rose, and so did the tension. "Got any ID on you?" he demanded. She furrowed her brow. "Excuse me, you're loitering. You look out of place. I've seen people like you around here before, causing problems." "People like me?" she repeated. He smirked, like it was a game, like he enjoyed watching the discomfort settle across her face. "You heard me. Now give me your ID, or I'll take you in." The sidewalk suddenly felt narrower. The sounds of the market faded into background noise. A few people had stopped to watch, but no one stepped forward. The coffee cup in her hand shook slightly, but her voice did not. "I'm not doing anything wrong. I have every right to be here." The officer scoffed, full of bitter disbelief. "Yeah? We'll see about that." And then, without warning, he stepped closer, grabbed her arm, and kicked her leg out from under her. The crowd gasped. The tulips hit the ground. Regina fell hard, her knee scraping the pavement. Her coffee spilled across the curb. And still, no one moved. She didn't cry out. She didn't scream. She looked up, breathing through the pain, and locked eyes with him. Her voice, when she spoke again, was low-measured but filled with a weight he didn't yet understand. "You're making a very big mistake," he laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh yeah? And what are you going to do about it?" But she didn't answer. Not yet. Because this wasn't the moment to show her hand. Not here. Not while the cameras were still pointing the other way. He stood over her, smug, confident. Another nobody put in her place. Another woman who'd go home humiliated while he walked away untouched. But he didn't know who she was. Not yet. He didn't know the badge tucked inside her waistband. He didn't know the position she held. He didn't know the department she ran. But he was about to find out. Because Regina Blake wasn't just a woman on the sidewalk. She was the incoming Director of Internal Affairs for the Charleston Police Department. And Sergeant Tom Garrison had just kicked the wrong woman. This wasn't just a misstep. It was career suicide. And as she slowly, painfully stood to her feet, dusting herself off, she looked him in the eye one more time. She didn't need to say it. Because the war he just started, she was going to finish. And the whole city would be watching. Stay with us, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Regina didn't move right away. Her leg throbbed where his boot had connected, and the pain pulsed up her side, but she stood steady, proud. She didn't let the wince reach her face. Sergeant Garrison stood there, chest puffed out like a peacock, hands on his hips, scanning the crowd like he expected applause. He didn't get it. Instead, the people around him stood frozen, caught between confusion and cowardice. They didn't know what they'd just witnessed. Or maybe they did, and they were afraid to admit it. "Let me make something real clear to you," Garrison said, his voice lower now, meant for her ears only. "I don't care who you think you are. You don't walk into this part of town and act like you run it." She stared at him, her lips pressed into a hard line. Still not speaking, still not rising to his bait. "You think just 'cause you walk around here with a latte and flowers like you belong, we won't notice?" He sneered. "We see through the act." Regina blinked slowly, her voice calm. "There was no act." Garrison leaned in, too close, his breath hot with ego and bad coffee. "You people always think you're above the law." She raised one brow. "You people?" she repeated, slowly, letting the words hang there like smoke. "Oh, don't play dumb with me," he spat. "I've been on this force 17 years. I know when someone's hiding something." "I'm not hiding anything," she said. "But you are." His nostrils flared. That got to him. He straightened up and turned, waving one arm toward the squad car now parked halfway on the curb. "Fine. You don't want to show ID? You want to keep mouthing off? We'll take you in, let you explain it to the captain." She tilted her head. "You sure you want to do that?" That tone, it wasn't defiant. It was surgical. A quiet threat dressed in velvet. Garrison faltered, just for a moment. Something about her confidence didn't match her appearance. Most people, after being thrown to the ground, after being manhandled, would be angry, afraid, defensive. But she wasn't any of those things. She was patient, and that scared him more than he realized. He motioned toward the radio clipped to his vest. "Dispatch, this is Unit 32 requesting backup at King Street Market. Possible 1056 uncooperative individual. Standing by." The code vague, unnecessary, and strategic. It gave him cover, gave him an excuse. That's how it worked. Call it in before anyone asks too many questions. Regina looked around as passers-by finally began to move again. A young couple across the street shuffled away, pretending not to look. An older man with a baseball cap slowly turned the other direction, fiddling with his phone. She knew what that meant, recording maybe. Maybe not. Either way, no one had come to help. Of course they didn't. People never stepped in until it was too late. A few moments later, another squad car pulled up. Two officers stepped out, one in his 40s with a stiff posture and mirrored sunglasses. The other younger, black, early 30s, with nervous eyes scanning the scene. Garrison waved them over. "This one refuses to cooperate. Says she doesn't have to answer questions." The older officer gave a casual nod. Business as usual. But the younger officer, he froze when he saw Regina. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable. But it was there. Recognition. And then hesitation. "Ma'am," he said slowly, carefully, "can I speak with you for a second?" "Over here?" Garrison frowned. "She doesn't need any special treatment." Officer James. Regina met the young officer's eyes and gave the faintest nod. "It's all right," she said. "Go ahead, officer." James stepped in closer, voice lowered. I know who you are. I didn't realize it's fine," she said. "Stay calm." He nodded once, swallowing hard, then stepped back beside his partner. The tension in the air changed immediately. Garrison noticed it. He didn't understand it, but he felt it. "What's going on?" Garrison asked, narrowing his eyes. "You know her?" There was a beat of silence. And then the younger officer spoke. "That's Dr. Regina Blake, sir, newly appointed Director of Internal Affairs, Charleston PD." The words hit like a gunshot. Everything went still. Regina didn't move. She didn't have to. Her very presence was now speaking louder than anything she could have said. Garrison's face went slack for half a second. Then he quickly tried to recover. "No one told me anything about a new director. You should have checked your emails," Officer James muttered under his breath. The older officer beside him cleared his throat awkwardly, taking a half step back. Regina finally pulled the badge from her waistband. She held it up not like a weapon, but like a mirror. Garrison stared at it, at her, then back at the badge. He started. "I didn't know. You didn't say I didn't have to," she interrupted, her voice firm but steady. "I was shopping for bread and tulips." "What part of that screamed in three to you?" He opened his mouth, then shut it. The younger officer turned away, visibly uncomfortable now. The older one looked like he was calculating how fast he could walk away without it looking suspicious. Regina stepped forward, slowly. Her limp was visible now, and it hurt like hell, but she didn't let it stop her. "You assaulted me," she said plainly. "In public, without cause. You used force. You called for backup under false pretenses. And you threatened arrest." "It was a misunderstanding," Garrison muttered. "No," she said. "It was a decision." She looked him in the eyes, not with rage, not with revenge, but with absolute certainty. "And it's going to cost you." He stepped back like her words had weight, like they knocked the air out of him. Because they did. Behind them, someone from the crowd was definitely recording now. She didn't turn to look, but she could hear the whispering, the murmurs of people piecing it together. A cop kicked a woman. That woman turned out to be the head of Internal Affairs. And this town? This town was about to learn the difference between power abused and power earned. Garrison looked down, his voice barely audible. "What are you gonna do?" Regina straightened her shoulders. The pain in her knee screamed, but she stood tall. "I'm going to do my job," she said, "and hold you accountable." She turned toward Officer James. "Please escort me to my vehicle and take his badge. Effective immediately, he is relieved of duty until further notice." James didn't hesitate. He walked with her, slowly, as the crowd began to part and the whispers turned to outrage. Behind them, Garrison stood frozen in place, badge still clipped to his chest, but not for much longer, because he had just assaulted the wrong woman. And now? Now the real consequences would begin. The moment Officer James reached for Garrison's badge, the world seemed to stop spinning. The market, the whispers, the glances, it all faded into a dull hush. All eyes were on the two men. James didn't rush. He didn't yell. He just extended his hand slowly, deliberately, waiting for Garrison to do the right thing. But Garrison didn't move. Not right away. He looked at James like he hadn't heard him, like the request wasn't real. His mouth parted slightly, his jaw twitching. A flicker of disbelief rippled through his features. This couldn't be happening, not to him. Not here. Not in the open like this. "Sergeant," Regina said calmly, her voice breaking through the standoff like a scalpel. "Your badge." James looked over at her and nodded once. "You heard her." Garrison's eyes darted to the small crowd that had gathered near the produce stand. Phones out. Recording. He was cornered, and he knew it. There was no radio call that could save him now. No half-baked report to twist the truth. This wasn't the privacy of a back alley or a blurred dash cam. This was sunlight, witnesses, authority staring him in the face, and for the first time, it wasn't his. His hand finally moved, trembling slightly as he unclipped the silver badge from his chest. He placed it into Officer James's open palm like it weighed 1,000 pounds. James stepped back. "You're done for today, sir." Garrison didn't respond. His lips pressed into a hard line, his fists clenched. And then he just stood there, still wearing the uniform, but stripped of everything that gave it meaning. Regina exhaled slowly. Not in relief, not yet, but in recognition that something irreversible had just begun. James turned to her. "Are you okay to walk, ma'am?" "I'll manage," she said, adjusting her coat and steadying her breath. "Thank you, officer." They walked slowly past the crowd. Some people averted their gaze. Others nodded subtly in support. A few kept filming, not ready to stop bearing witness just yet. No one dared speak to Garrison. He stood there like a man unplugged from the world, watching the story shift out of his control. When Regina reached her car, a sleek Navy SUV parked on the side street, James opened the door for her. She winced as she stepped in, her bruised knee protesting every inch of movement. "You want me to call it in?" James asked. "Don't worry," Regina replied. "Internal Affairs already knows I'm here." James looked at her for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For what just happened?" Regina met his eyes. "You didn't do it?" "No," he said. "But I saw it. I saw it happen, and I froze." "You spoke up," she said. "That's more than most." He nodded once. "Still, it shouldn't have happened." Regina didn't answer. She just closed the door and rolled down the window. "Take care, Officer James, and keep your eyes open. This department needs more like you." As James stepped back and the SUV pulled away, Garrison still hadn't moved. He watched the vehicle disappear around the corner, swallowed by the rhythm of Charleston's late morning traffic. The sirens had long stopped, but the damage echoed in his chest like a slow drumbeat. Back at headquarters, word traveled faster than policy. Before Regina even reached her office, murmurs had already begun. She parked in the restricted garage, limped through the side entrance, and nodded at the stunned front desk sergeant who wasn't sure whether to salute her or stare. She passed through the hallway like a shadow returning to daylight. Every officer she passed paused. Some offered weak smiles. Others avoided her eyes. A few looked shaken, like they'd just heard that someone had finally lit a match beneath the floorboards. Inside her office, Regina sat down carefully. Her knee ached, her back tensed, but she didn't let her posture drop. Carla, her assistant, knocked twice before stepping in. "I saw the video," she said quietly, holding a tablet. "It's already online." Regina raised an eyebrow. "That was fast." "Too fast," Carla replied. "It's got over 30,000 views in the last hour. Some local activist group posted it first, then a reporter picked it up." Regina held out her hand, took the tablet, and hit play. There she was, on the pavement. Coffee spilled, knee twisted, Garrison standing over her like a man entitled to obedience, and then her standing, her voice, her badge. It played like a movie, but it wasn't fiction. It was reality. Carla folded her arms. "He's going to try and spin it. I know. He'll say you didn't identify yourself, that you were combative, that it was protocol." Regina nodded slowly. "That's why I called this meeting." Carla blinked. "Meeting." Regina turned her monitor toward her and tapped the screen. "Senior Command, 2:30 p.m. Every precinct lead, Internal Affairs, Civilian Oversight, everyone who matters." Carla looked nervous. "You sure you want to do this so soon?" "I'm not waiting," Regina said. "We don't have the luxury of letting this blow over. It needs to blow up." The clock ticked on the wall behind them. Carla exhaled. "Okay, I'll prepare the notes." As she left, Regina looked back at the tablet. The comments were already rolling in. "She handled that better than I ever could. How many times has this happened to women who didn't have a badge? He picked the wrong one." And he had, because the backlash was just beginning. But so was something else, accountability. And this time, it wasn't optional. The conference room on the 4th floor of the Charleston Police Department was usually a quiet space, used for training sessions, strategy meetings, and the occasional birthday cake send-off. But today, the air inside was sharp, thick with something heavier than tension. Accountability. Regina stood at the front of the room, a thin black folder resting on the table beside her. She wore a navy suit, tailored and sharp, the kind that didn't scream for attention but commanded it anyway. Her knee was still sore, her body bruised, but her voice was more clear than ever. Around the long oak table, officers filtered in slowly at first, then all at once. Some were department heads. Others were union reps. A few looked straight at her. Most didn't. She could see it all in their faces. Confusion, concern, a touch of defiance from the old guard. Some didn't know yet. Others had seen the video and came in knowing exactly what this was. When the last chair slid into place and the door clicked shut, Regina didn't waste time. She reached for the folder, opened it, and let the silence breathe. "You all saw what happened," she began. "Some of you saw it online. Some of you heard it through whispers. Others may have read the report that was filed last night. But in case there's any doubt, let me be clear. I was assaulted by one of our own." A shift rippled across the table. She looked directly at the man sitting at the far end, Chief Administrative Officer Mallory. Old school, rigid, and always watching. And this isn't about ego. It's not about embarrassment. This is about culture. A culture that allowed a sergeant to approach a black woman in broad daylight in a public space and kick her to the ground because he didn't like how she looked. Murmurs tried to rise, but she cut them off. He didn't recognize me. And that's the problem. Not because I want to be treated special, but because he felt empowered to treat anyone like that. And I don't care if it was me or a school teacher or a retiree out for groceries. What happened was criminal. The room was dead silent now. She reached into the folder again, pulling out a series of stapled pages. This is Officer Garrison's complaint history. 37 documented incidents over 12 years. 5 accusations of excessive force. Multiple reports of harassment filed by both civilians and fellow officers. She placed the documents down one by one. These were buried, dismissed, or worse, never followed up on. Her eyes moved to Captain Ward, seated across from her. "Your precinct, Captain. 4 complaints in the last 2 years alone, and not one was escalated beyond your desk." Ward shifted uncomfortably. "With respect, Director, some of those were unsubstantiated, so they were ignored," she interrupted. "That's what we do now? I followed protocol." "Then protocol is broken," she said, her voice harder now. She scanned the room. "This department doesn't have a bad apple problem. We have a tree rotting from the inside, and everyone sitting at this table has watched the roots spread." The words cut, and they were meant to. Mallory cleared his throat. "So what are you proposing, exactly?" She turned and clicked the monitor behind her. A slide appeared. "Internal Affairs Reform Initiative, immediate recommendations." "I'm proposing we stop pretending this is isolated. I'm proposing we require a review of every complaint from the last 5 years that was marked inconclusive or unsubstantiated, particularly those with repeat offenders. I'm proposing mandatory de-escalation and bias training for every badge in this building. And I'm proposing that Sergeant Thomas Garrison be terminated, not suspended, not reassigned, terminated." That last word echoed. Someone coughed. Someone else shifted papers. But no one spoke against it. Because how could they? They all saw the video. They all saw the truth. Regina leaned forward slightly, resting her palms on the table. "I'm not here to play politics. I didn't take this position to sit in a glass office and smile for public relations. I came here to clean house. If that makes people uncomfortable, good. It should, because being a public servant isn't supposed to be comfortable." She paused, letting the silence settle again. Then she looked directly at Mallory. "You gave me this job because you said the department needed change. Now change is here, and it doesn't ask for permission." For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then, slowly, quietly, Officer Yvette Gomez, mid-40s, respected, soft-spoken, nodded from the far left corner. "You've got my vote," she said. Then another voice. Then another. The room didn't erupt. There were no cheers. Just a quiet consensus that something had cracked open, and they weren't going to be able to close it again. After the meeting, Regina walked out alone, her heels clicking against the tile floor. Her face was unreadable, calm, but beneath it, a fire burned. Not rage, not pride, conviction. Outside in the hallway, Officer James was waiting. "How did it go?" he asked. She didn't stop walking. "About the way I expected." He followed beside her. "They going to back you?" "They don't have a choice anymore," he smiled faintly. "That's what I like to hear." She stopped then, turned to him. "You know this isn't over, right?" He nodded. "Yeah, but it's the start." Later that evening, back at her home, Regina sat at her kitchen table with an ice pack on her knee and a file open in front of her. It was thicker than it should have been. Pages and pages of complaints. Most never saw the light of day. She sipped her tea slowly, scanning lines of text that all began the same way. Officer exhibited aggressive behavior, used unnecessary force, failed to follow procedure. It was endless, but she didn't look away, because facing it was the only way to fix it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Carla. "City news stations are all covering it now. You're the lead story." She put the phone down. Let them watch, she thought. Let them talk. Let them all see what real accountability looks like. She stood slowly, her knee aching under the weight of the day. But she didn't complain, she didn't crumble, because this wasn't the end of anything. It was just the beginning. By the next morning, Charleston wasn't whispering anymore. It was shouting. The story had exploded overnight. What started as a grainy phone recording shared by a teenager on social media had been picked up by a local news blog. Within hours, it hit regional television, then national. The headlines varied, but they all told the same story. Police sergeant assaults black woman at farmer's market. She turns out to be his boss. The video was everywhere. Regina's calm voice, Garrison's barked threats, the kick, the silence, and then the badge. People couldn't stop talking about it. On buses, in churches, in barbershops, over breakfast tables. Black families in particular watched the footage with a mix of anger, sorrow, and something else, recognition, because they'd seen this play out before, just not like this. Not with a reversal that felt, for once, like justice interrupting the script. Regina didn't post anything, didn't give an interview, didn't sit for a press conference. She let the tape speak for itself. The truth didn't need embellishment, but still, the calls came. Local journalists, national reporters, civil rights organizations, politicians, even a senator's office left a message requesting a private conversation. Her inbox was overflowing, half full of support, half full of vitriol. She read none of it, because this wasn't about press. It was about pressure, and it was working. By noon, the mayor's office released a statement calling the video deeply disturbing and affirming their support for Director Blake's investigation. The Police Oversight Committee announced an emergency hearing. The City Council moved to approve new transparency protocols for officer complaints. It wasn't reform, not yet, but it was movement. And movement, in this system, was rare enough to count. Inside the department, the mood was different. Officers moved slower. Conversations dipped to hush when Regina walked past. Some nodded at her now. Some didn't look at all. The shift was undeniable. She wasn't just the woman in charge anymore. She was the woman in that video. And no one knew what to do with that. Some of them were afraid, not because they were guilty of the same behavior as Garrison, but because they'd enabled it, or ignored it, or convinced themselves it wasn't their problem. Now it was everyone's problem. At lunch, Regina sat alone in her office, eating a turkey sandwich that had gone dry in its paper wrapper. She didn't taste it. Her eyes were glued to a live stream from a protest forming just outside City Hall. It wasn't huge, but it was loud. A few dozen people, holding signs that read, "We believe Regina, justice can't wait, and reform the force." One woman, standing on a folding chair, had a megaphone and a message. "We're not here just because she's in internal affairs. We're here because for once, the woman they tried to humiliate had the power to fight back." The crowd roared in agreement. Regina closed the laptop lid, sat back in her chair, and let out a slow breath. Not relief, not pride, just gravity. She understood the weight of moments like this. They didn't come often, and they never came easy. That afternoon, Carla stepped into her office carrying a manila envelope. "More letters," she said gently. "Mostly thank you notes. A few threats. I separated the worst ones." Regina gave a dry smile. "Appreciate it," Carla hesitated. "You might want to read this one, though." She handed her a single envelope. Handwritten, no return address. Regina opened it and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Inside was a short note. "My daughter was arrested last year by Officer Garrison." He pushed her face into the ground while she screamed for help. They said she resisted. No charges were filed, but she hasn't been the same since. We filed a complaint. Nothing happened. I'm glad someone's finally listening. Thank you. There was no signature. Regina stared at the paper. She didn't cry, but her throat tightened and her chest ached with the weight of it. This was the real story, not the viral clip, not the headlines. It was the quiet aftermath no one filmed. The lives altered by abuse that never made it past a form on a desk. She folded the note and slid it into her drawer. Later that night, on the local evening news, a reporter stood outside the precinct. "We reached out to Director Blake for comment," she said, but she declined. However, sources close to the department say her office is now reviewing a decade's worth of complaints against Sergeant Garrison and several other officers. Community leaders are calling this a turning point. But the question remains, will the system finally change? Or is this just another moment that fades when the headlines do? The question hung in the air like smoke. Back in her living room, Regina sat on the couch beside her teenage son, Jordan. He had watched the news in silence, not once looking at her, just staring at the screen like he was watching something he didn't know how to feel about. After it ended, he finally turned to her. "You okay?" She nodded. He paused. "Are you gonna be in trouble?" Her hand found his. "No, baby, I was the trouble." He blinked, then laughed softly. "That's kinda cool." "Not really," she said, "but it's necessary." He leaned into her shoulder. "You didn't look scared." "I was." He looked up at her. "But you still did it." She nodded. "That's what courage is. It's not the absence of fear. It's doing what's right, even when you're terrified." They sat there in silence. No more news, no more talking. Just a mother and a son in the eye of a storm, because the real fight wasn't on TV. It was still coming. Back in her office, Regina stood over a stack of internal reports that hadn't seen daylight in years. She wasn't just investigating a single man anymore, she was pulling at the roots of something far bigger, something tangled and ugly and old. The folder in front of her wasn't about Sergeant Garrison, not directly. It was about what allowed him to flourish. The silence, the convenience, the quiet complicity of a system built to protect itself. Each file she opened was like peeling back layers of denial. One report detailed a 2018 incident. A black high school teacher pulled over for a broken taillight, then detained for non-compliance after calmly asking why backup had been called. Officer Garrison's name was scribbled in the margin. The complaint had been marked resolved. No follow-up, no discipline. Another file, dated 2020, involved a Hispanic single father who had been stopped outside a grocery store. Garrison claimed he fit the description of a suspect. The man was forced to the ground in front of his 8-year-old daughter. Witnesses said the man never resisted. One even submitted a written statement. Still, no action taken was scrawled in red ink across the final page. There were dozens more. Different names, same patterns, excessive force, racial profiling, disrespectful conduct. Each one closed like it was never worth a second thought. Regina ran her fingers across the cover of one of the folders. The paper felt worn, like it had been handled 100 times, just not by the people who should have done something about it. She picked up her pen and began making notes, drawing arrows between reports, building a web of negligence. She wasn't just documenting Garrison's misconduct, now she was uncovering a timeline, a trail of decisions made not by one man, but by an entire network of supervisors who either looked away or helped him do it. Her phone buzzed. Carla's voice came through the speaker. "You've got someone here asking to speak to you." Former officer. Name's Reggie Miles. Regina narrowed her eyes. Reggie Miles? From West District? That's the one. He says he has information. Said you'd know what it's about. She paused. That name, she hadn't heard it in years. Reggie had left the department suddenly back in 2015. No warning, no public fallout, just gone. At the time, it was rumored he'd taken early retirement. Some said it was health-related. Others whispered it was political. But no one had ever confirmed anything. Regina stood. Send him in. A few seconds later, the door opened. Reggie stepped inside, late 50s, still broad-shouldered, but carrying the weight of years in the lines of his face. He looked tired, but not weak. They shook hands, then sat across from each other. You heard what happened, Regina said. I did, he replied. Didn't think I'd ever see someone stand up like that from the inside. Regina tilted her head. You tried once, didn't you? He nodded slowly. I filed a report against Garrison in 2014, after I saw him slam a kid against a vending machine during a school call. The boy was maybe 16, scrawny, didn't fight back, just asked a question Garrison didn't like. Regina frowned. What happened with the report? Reggie let out a bitter laugh. Captain at the time told me to drop it, said it would muddy my record if I made noise. Next thing I knew, my schedule changed. Got stuck on graveyard shifts, reassigned to the worst zones. They made it clear, speak up again, and I was out. And then you left. I couldn't keep breathing in the smoke while pretending there was no fire. Regina leaned forward. Do you have anything documented? I kept copies, he said, reaching into his satchel. Not just mine. Others too. Officers who tried to report Garrison and got shuffled out. I told myself I'd burn them one day, but something told me to hold on. He handed her a stack of papers. They weren't official records, just photocopies, personal notes, and emails. But they filled in gaps she didn't even know were there. One note stood out. Garrison threatened to plant something on me if I ever opened my mouth again. She looked up at Reggie. Why now? He didn't blink. Because you made it possible. And because I'm tired of carrying it. Regina nodded. This helps. A lot. Reggie stood to leave. Just don't let them bury it again. I won't, she said. Not this time. After he left, Regina sat still for a long moment. The silence in the room wasn't peace, it was the stillness before a wave hits. She knew what came next. Exposure. Retaliation. Politics dressed up as procedure. But she didn't care. She opened a new file, labeled it, Historical Complaint Pattern Garrison and Associates. Then she wrote one word at the top, systemic. That evening, as the sun set behind the brick walls of the precinct, Regina sat in the Internal Affairs conference room, now empty, except for her. She spread out the documents like puzzle pieces. Names, dates, behaviors, supervisors, outcomes. It was all there, a map of failure. But now, someone was finally drawing a line. She flipped open her notebook and began drafting a report, long, detailed, irrefutable. This wouldn't just be about one officer. It would be about a department, a system, and what it cost when people in power thought no one would hold them accountable. Because when you shine a light on rot, it doesn't clean itself up. You have to dig it out piece by piece. And Regina Blake? She had just started digging. The next morning, the Charleston Police Department felt like a building holding its breath. Whispers clung to the hallways. Phones rang with less energy. Officers walked a little more carefully. The badge didn't feel as light as it used to. Regina stood in front of the glass doors to the main precinct conference room, her reflection staring back at her calm, composed, but carrying the full weight of what was coming. Behind her, in that room, were 15 of the department's senior officers, captains, lieutenants, division leads. Many of them had been in uniform longer than she'd been alive. Some had shaken her hand on day one. Some had tried to avoid her ever since. She adjusted the file in her hands and stepped inside. The chatter died immediately. The chairs were filled. A few officers looked up with tight nods. Others glanced away, pretending to read the documents in front of them. Captain Ward sat at the head of the table, a pen tapping impatiently against a legal pad. He didn't hide his discomfort. Regina walked to the front, placed her folder on the table, and remained standing. She didn't want a seat. Not today. Thank you all for coming on short notice, she began, her voice steady, firm. What I'm about to share with you isn't easy to hear, but if we're going to fix what's broken in this department, we're going to have to look directly at it. She opened the folder. This, she said, holding up a report, is the 5th misconduct complaint filed against Sergeant Garrison in a 2-year span. Excessive force, filed by a civilian witness, never followed up on, closed by Captain Ward. Ward sat up straighter, his jaw tightening. That complaint was reviewed. There wasn't enough to protect the department from bad optics, Regina interrupted, locking eyes with him. That's what you meant, not enough to risk headlines. He didn't respond. She placed that file down and picked up another. This one was filed by a fellow officer. A rookie, said Garrison, pulled his weapon during a routine noise complaint, threatened an unarmed teenage boy. The rookie tried to file a statement. A week later, he was transferred out of the unit and assigned overnight parking enforcement. A few officers around the table shifted uncomfortably. Regina didn't flinch. That officer never made it past his 3rd year. He left the force, not because of pay, not because of hours, but because no one had his back when he did the right thing. She paused, letting that sink in. And that's the real problem, isn't it? Not just the men like Garrison who abuse power, but the culture that protects them, that rationalizes their behavior. That tells everyone else to keep their heads down if they want to keep their jobs. Lieutenant Brooks, seated near the middle, raised a hand. Director Blake, no offense, but isn't this something for internal affairs to investigate privately? Do we really need to air this in front of the whole leadership? Regina's eyes narrowed. That's exactly the thinking that got us here. Quiet investigations, no paper trails, meetings behind closed doors. That's how rot spreads, in silence. Brooks lowered his hand. Regina leaned forward slightly. You want to talk about morale? Let's talk about what it does to morale when the officers who try to report misconduct are labeled troublemakers. Let's talk about what it does when black and brown citizens file complaints and get told nothing happened. When they get asked if they're sure they didn't provoke something. Let's talk about how long we've let people like Garrison wear this badge without consequence while everyone else just watched. A long silence followed. Then a voice from the far corner broke it. Officer Yvette Gomez. Quiet but respected. Never one to stir the pot. But today, something in her had shifted. I remember when he put a high school kid in cuffs for jaywalking, she said softly. Threw him against a squad car like he'd just robbed a bank. I filed an incident report. It disappeared. All heads turned. Captain Ward cleared his throat. That's a serious accusation, officer. It happened, she said flatly. Regina turned to her. Thank you, Officer Gomez. More silence. Then another officer, Lieutenant Kenner, spoke. So what now? What do you want from us? Regina didn't blink. I want you to choose, right here, right now. Are you going to keep protecting this culture? Or are you going to help me tear it down? She reached into the folder and pulled out a document. I'm submitting a formal recommendation that Sergeant Thomas Garrison be terminated effective immediately. Not suspended, not reassigned. Terminated. And I expect support from every division head at this table. Murmurs filled the room. Some looked stunned. Some looked like they'd been waiting for this. Captain Ward looked like he was chewing glass. You're setting a precedent, he said. You're opening a door we won't be able to close. I hope so, Regina replied, because that door should never have been closed in the first place. Another beat passed. Then slowly, one by one, hands began to rise. Yvette Gomez, Lieutenant Kenner, Captain Holloway. 7, then 10, then 12. Even Captain Ward, finally, raised his hand slowly, reluctantly, not because he believed in it, but because he knew the tide had turned. Regina nodded. Then, it's done. I'll submit the formal termination order to HR within the hour. She gathered the papers, slid them back into her folder, and met every gaze around the room with calm determination. This department will change, she said. Not tomorrow, not because of one vote, but because we are done pretending this isn't happening." As she turned to leave, no one stopped her. No one dared, because Regina Blake had just drawn a line in the sand, and whether they liked it or not, the department had just crossed it. Darren Garrison hadn't slept in 2 nights. Not really. He dozed off on the couch once, for maybe an hour, but even then his dreams kept dragging him back to the same moment, her voice, her badge, the sting of humiliation he'd never seen coming. Over and over again, he couldn't stop replaying it. The look in her eyes, the weight of the silence around him, the realization that every ounce of control he thought he had was an illusion. He built his identity around that badge, around being the one who called the shots, and in a matter of minutes, it had all slipped through his fingers. Now, the weight wasn't just emotional, it was professional. He could feel the walls closing in. The phone calls had stopped. His union rep wasn't returning texts. And every time he turned on the TV, he saw her face. Calm, professional, determined. A woman he'd once kicked. And now, she was dismantling everything he thought made him powerful. So he made a decision. He had to talk to her. Not through lawyers, not through statements, just face to face, before everything was gone. It took him half an hour to get the courage to dial her number. His hand hovered over the screen. He hated what it meant, but he hated the silence more. She picked up after 2 rings. "This is Deputy Chief Blake. It's Darren," he said, his voice low and dry. "I need to talk to you." A pause. "Then, I'll be in my office for the next hour. If you're serious about talking, come find me." Click. He sat there, phone still pressed to his ear, long after the call ended. Then, without a word, he got up, put on a wrinkled shirt, and drove to the precinct he once walked through like he owned it. Now he wasn't even sure if he belonged inside. The lobby was quiet when he arrived. A young officer behind the front desk gave him a wide-eyed stare but didn't say anything. Garrison didn't wait for permission. He knew the way, every hallway, every turn. But it felt different now, smaller, colder. He reached her door, knocked once. "Come in." He stepped inside. Regina sat behind her desk, composed as always, papers spread neatly across a leather blotter. She didn't stand, didn't smile, she just looked at him. "You showed up," she said. "I did." She gestured to the chair across from her. He sat down slowly, hands folded in his lap. He looked tired but not broken. At least not yet. "I saw the video," he said finally. "I saw how I looked, how it all looked." "And?" she asked, voice measured. He swallowed. "And I get it now." She raised an eyebrow. "You get it now?" He nodded, but it wasn't confident. "Yeah. I mean, I didn't realize at the time, but watching it, I looked like every bad cop story that people talk about, like the ones I used to say were exaggerated." Her expression didn't change. "Do you know what the worst part was?" he continued. "I didn't even think twice that day. Not once. I saw you, and something in me just decided. You didn't belong. You were suspicious. And I didn't stop to question it." "You never have," she said quietly. He looked away. "Maybe not, but now I am." She leaned forward slightly. "Is that why you're here? To explain?" "No," he said. "I'm here because I can feel what's coming. The fallout, the press, the department's already moving. I'm about to lose everything. And I guess I wanted to say something before that happened." Regina looked at him for a long moment. Then she asked, "Why did you become a cop, Darren?" He blinked. "What? It's not a trick question. I want to know." He hesitated, then shrugged. "My dad was a cop. So was my uncle. It's just what the men in my family did. I guess I thought being in uniform meant something, that it made you respected, untouchable. And that's what you wanted?" "I wanted to matter," he admitted. "I wanted people to move when I spoke, to listen." Regina sat back. "And you thought fear and power were the same thing?" He didn't argue, because deep down he knew she was right. "Do you regret it?" she asked. He looked down. "The way I treated you?" "Yeah. And the others too, if I'm being honest. The ones who didn't have a badge to hold up. I treated a lot of people like they were beneath me. And now, I don't know how to undo that. You can't undo it, she said. But you can own it. He nodded. I want to. She tilted her head. Do you want to because you believe in it, or because you're trying to save yourself? That landed hard. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, maybe both, but that doesn't make it less true. She studied him. He looked older than he had a week ago. Not because of time, but because truth had a way of aging people. I'm not here to offer you redemption, Darren, she said. That's not mine to give. But what I will say is there's a difference between guilt and accountability. Guilt is about how you feel. Accountability is about what you do next. He took a breath. Then what should I do? Start by telling the truth, she said. Not just to me, but to the department, to the public, to every person you ever dismissed or disrespected. And not in a press release. In your own words. He looked like he might protest. Then he nodded. Okay. Regina stood. The conversation was over. As he walked to the door, she called out one last thing. You were right about one thing. He turned. That day in the park, you said I didn't belong there. But the truth is, maybe you're the one who never belonged. He didn't flinch, just nodded slowly, then left. Regina returned to her desk, the silence stretching out again. She didn't feel victorious. She felt steady. And sometimes, in a fight like this, steady was more powerful than anything else. The day started like any other in the precinct. Phones ringing, officers shuffling papers, coffee brewing in the break room. But beneath the routine was something colder, tighter, a quiet tension humming through every hallway, every whispered conversation. Everyone knew what was coming. By noon, the internal affairs report had been finalized. Regina held it in her hands, 63 pages long, bound, annotated, and impossible to ignore. The contents were damning, not just against Darren Garrison, but against the system that had protected him for years. Testimonies from former officers, written statements from citizens, incident reports that had conveniently gone missing until now. It was all in there. The evidence spoke louder than any press conference ever could. Regina stood in the small conference room alongside Captain Lewis, the department's longtime commander. He looked exhausted, not defiant, not combative, just worn down, like a man who'd finally realized the foundation beneath him had already cracked years ago. He was holding on to the last pieces. "We've got everything we need," he said quietly, flipping through the binder. "This isn't a question of whether he should go. It's a question of how we handle it." Regina nodded. "We handle it publicly, transparently. No spin, no safe landing." Lewis sighed and rubbed a hand over his jaw. "You know this is going to shake the entire department, right?" "Good," she said. "Maybe it needs to be shaken." The decision came down hard. Effective immediately, Sergeant Darren Garrison was terminated from the Charleston Police Department. The formal language in the release read violation of use of force policy, racial profiling, conduct unbecoming of an officer. But the truth behind those words was much heavier. The man who once walked through the department like he owned it was now gone. No badge, no gun, no farewell handshakes. Just a sealed envelope with his final paycheck and a department-issued box for his belongings. Regina didn't attend the meeting where it was handed to him. She didn't need to. She had more important work to do. The ripple effects started immediately. Local news outlets aired the footage of Garrison being walked out of the precinct by Internal Affairs. No cuffs, but no dignity either. His head was down. The cameras were merciless. The clip ran on repeat during the evening news cycle with headlines like "Fired Without Apology," "The Fall of Sergeant Garrison," and "Charleston Police Faces Reckoning." Social media lit up. Some praised Regina for standing firm. Others questioned the system that let Garrison last as long as he did. A few called it political, predictable noise. But most people, especially those who had been ignored, overlooked, and mistreated for decades, finally saw a glimmer of accountability. Regina didn't celebrate. She didn't sit back. She called a second meeting. Not with the top brass this time, but with the officers who were still in the field. The beat cops. The ones with dirt on their uniforms and exhaustion in their bones. the ones who had to explain to the public why things were changing and why they hadn't changed sooner. She stood at the front of the room, again holding no notes, no podium, just truth. "I know some of you are angry," she said. "Some of you feel like one of your own was thrown under the bus, that we broke a code by making this public. But let me ask you something. What kind of code protects harm? What kind of code lets good officers get pushed out while bad ones get promoted?" The room was silent. She stepped closer. "I've read every complaint you've ever filed," she said. "Every report that got buried. Every note that never made it to a supervisor's desk. And I know some of you tried to do the right thing. You were told to stay quiet, that it wasn't worth the trouble." She took a breath. "I'm here to tell you that silence is no longer policy." A few heads nodded. Not many, but a few. That was enough for now. The next step came fast. Regina worked with the city's Civilian Oversight Board to implement a revised complaint process, one that didn't just get routed to the same supervisors who'd been ignoring them for years. Complaints now had to be reviewed by an independent panel within 7 business days. Patterns of behavior would be flagged automatically by a new internal tracking system. And no officer, regardless of rank, could see their own file before an investigation was closed. But she didn't stop there. She partnered with community leaders to host town hall meetings, face-to-face conversations between officers and residents. Real stories, real hurt, real questions. She showed up to every single one, even when the rooms were tense, even when people shouted, even when someone called her a traitor for staying in law enforcement at all. She didn't flinch, because she knew the only way to build trust was to be willing to stand in the fire. Meanwhile, Garrison's name faded from the news. No apology, no redemption arc, just absence. But inside the department, the silence he left behind was louder than anything he ever said. Officers began talking to each other differently. Supervisors checked in more. The locker room jokes lost their edge, not because the culture had been fixed, but because people were watching now, and they knew someone would speak up. Back in her office, Regina looked out the window one evening, watching the sun dip behind the skyline. Her knee still ached sometimes when she stood too long, but she barely noticed anymore. Carla walked in quietly. "We just got confirmation from City Hall," she said. "The mayor's approved the funding for the new de-escalation training program." Regina nodded. "Good." Carla paused. "You sure you're okay? You've barely slept. I haven't seen you take a day off since all this started." Regina smiled faintly. "I'll sleep when this department stops eating its own." Carla smiled too, then placed a file on the desk. Another letter from a woman named Deborah Mason. Her son was one of Garrison's arrests 3 years ago. "He's out now," she says. "Thank you." Regina picked up the envelope and opened it slowly. Inside was a photo of a young black man in a graduation gown, beaming, holding a diploma. Written in blue ink across the bottom, "He made it." Because someone believed the truth mattered. Regina's throat tightened. She didn't need applause. That picture was enough. She placed it next to the other letters in the drawer, then stood up and got back to work. Because this wasn't the end. It was the start of a department, maybe even a city, finally learning how to tell the truth. One policy, one officer, one choice at a time. Months passed. The precinct wasn't the same, and neither was the city. Darren Garrison's name had faded from the headlines, but the legacy of what happened on that cool Sunday morning in the park continued to ripple through every corner of Charleston's justice system. Regina had become a symbol, though she never asked to be. Her quiet strength, her refusal to shrink, had awakened something far larger than policy. People weren't just talking about change anymore, they were expecting it, demanding it, watching. The department's tone had shifted. Meetings no longer opened with half-hearted nods or performative remarks. Now there was weight in the room, urgency. And it wasn't just about avoiding another scandal. It was about repairing what had been broken long before Garrison made his last mistake. The new complaint review system was fully operational. Officers knew that every report filed would be read, logged, and cross-checked. The wall of silence had cracked wide open, Patterns were now tracked. Repeat offenders couldn't hide behind paperwork anymore. Training protocols had been rewritten from the ground up. Bias wasn't a workshop checkbox. It was a conversation officers were required to revisit monthly. And more importantly, younger officers were being mentored differently. The culture was starting to shift not because they feared the consequences, but because they finally understood why they were necessary. But none of that came easy. Regina still walked through resistance every single day. Some officers still avoided her gaze in the hallway. Some still believed she'd gone too far. Some said it out loud. But those voices no longer controlled the room. They were loud but no longer powerful. And over time, even some of them grew quieter, because the results spoke for themselves. Use of force incidents were down. Civilian complaints had decreased. And, for the first time in years, community attendance at public police forums had tripled. People were showing up, not because they trusted everything, but because they finally believed someone would listen. One afternoon, Regina sat in her office flipping through a stack of internal reports. Her inbox was flooded, her phone was buzzing, but for once, she let it all wait. She was reading something she hadn't seen before, a letter from a community liaison in the West District. It wasn't formal. It was handwritten. It read, "We've been trying to fix this from the outside for years. I didn't think someone from the inside would ever help pull the weight. But you did. And you haven't stopped. Just wanted to say we see it. And we're with you." Regina smiled faintly and tucked the note into her drawer beside the others. Over the last few months, she'd built a quiet collection. Letters, photos, thank yous. Some anonymous, some signed in nervous cursive. All reminders that the fight was worth it. Later that same day, she got an unexpected delivery. A plain envelope, no return address. Inside, a single piece of paper and a familiar name at the bottom, Darren Garrison. She read it slowly. It wasn't an apology, not in the traditional sense. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It didn't try to rewrite history. It was short, honest, maybe even sincere. He wrote about the time since his termination, how he'd gone numb at first, angry, lost, how he nearly left Charleston entirely but stayed because something inside him told him to sit with the discomfort, to live in the consequences. He said he'd started volunteering at a local community center, not to repair his image, but because he didn't know how else to show up. He wrote about hearing stories from young men, black, brown, often tired, who reminded him of the people he once dismissed. He wrote about listening. At the end of the letter, he didn't ask for anything. He just wrote, "I can't undo what I did, but I can try to understand it, and maybe that's where it starts." Regina folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as the others. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just breathed a little deeper. A few days later, she stood on the steps of a local high school gymnasium, addressing a packed room of parents, students, officers, and city staff. The air inside buzzed with energy. This wasn't a protest. It wasn't a press event. It was a progress report. And the audience wanted answers. She didn't read from a script. She never did. Instead, she looked out at the crowd, at the generations represented in the rows of folding chairs, and began with the only thing that felt true. "I never wanted to be a symbol," she said, "and I sure as hell didn't ask to become a headline. But if standing up means others stand taller because of it, then I'll do it again, every single time." The room was quiet. No interruptions, no outbursts, just listening. She continued. "The day I was thrown to the ground, I didn't speak up because I had a badge. I spoke up because I was tired of watching the same story play out with different names, over and over, generation after generation. I spoke up because silence protects power, and I'm done being silent." A hand went up in the front row. A teenage girl, maybe 16, eyes sharp, notebook on her lap. "Do you think he changed?" she asked. "The cop who did it?" Regina paused. Everyone leaned in. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "But I know I did. And I know the department did. And sometimes that's how change begins. One person, one decision, one moment that refuses to stay buried." The girl nodded slowly and lowered her hand. When the forum ended, Regina didn't head straight for the exit. She stayed, shook hands, answered questions, even posed for a few photos she never would have agreed to a year ago. Outside, the sun was setting over the Charleston skyline, casting long shadows across the brick buildings and winding streets. A new shift of officers was beginning their rounds. One of them, a young black woman barely out of academy training, held the door for Regina as she walked to her car. "Director Blake," she said, a little nervous. "Just wanted to say, I joined because of you." Regina turned, surprised. "You saw what happened," the young officer continued, "how you handled it. And I realized maybe we need people on the inside too. So, thank you." Regina nodded. "You're here now. That means everything." The officer smiled and disappeared into the building. Regina got in her car, adjusted the mirror, and sat for a moment in the fading light. No music, no calls, just quiet. She knew this wasn't a happy ending, because justice doesn't end. It continues. It pushes forward. It demands more. But in that moment she felt something rare, peace, because she had done what few dared to do. She stood her ground. She told the truth. And she changed the system, not with noise, not with anger, but with clarity, courage, and the kind of resolve that echoes long after the headlines fade. And somewhere, in every precinct that watched, in every city still stuck in silence, her story whispered the same message. It's possible. And now it's your turn. Sometimes, life reminds us that silence isn't neutral, that staying quiet in the face of injustice doesn't make us safe, it makes us complicit. This story isn't just about a corrupt cop or a powerful woman. It's about what happens when someone finally says, enough, when dignity stands taller than fear, when one act of courage forces a system to stop, look in the mirror, and reckon with itself. And for those of us who've lived long enough to see cycles repeat, who've watched history bend, but not always break, this story is a reminder it's never too late to raise your voice, to demand better, to believe in accountability not just for others, but for ourselves. Maybe you're not wearing a badge, but you still carry influence in your family, in your community, in your vote, your voice, your story. Let this be a reminder that the fight for fairness doesn't end at retirement. It's passed on through example, through how we stand when others sit, through how we speak when others whisper. Justice begins with one moment of truth, and sometimes that moment starts with you. If this message moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share this story with someone who still believes in doing what's right, no matter how long it takes.